I am, of course, delighted to be here today and grateful for the invitation. I would have thought that the first couple of times I would have persuaded you otherwise, but having been invited once again, I'm happy to be here. And I thought that it would be interesting to reflect a little bit now at this point, having been a math teacher now for 2 years, on what has changed and how I ended up here and what was driving that move. And interestingly, before this meeting, Steve kindly sent me a letter that came from the New York Times book review, and I thought it was very interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share it with you. And let me see if I can do this without causing disaster. Okay. And hopefully we can use this as a starting point today. To the editor, why is reference to mathematical ideas considered superfluous technical jargon, while references to a medieval story of romance and a 100-year-old book about a day in Dublin are not? Giles Harvey, in reviewing The Making of Incarnation by Tom McCarthy, January 2nd, castigates the author for having a character talk about a discrete time Markov chain in a countable state space. I and a large group of others with no more than a college education in math, physics, finance, engineering, or statistics certainly understand these terms. On the other hand, I had to look up the story of Tristan und Isolde. Somehow, expecting readers to know Joyce's Ulysses is not considered pedantic. My guess is that right now, more people are using Markov chains in their work than are reading Ulysses. Many, of course, have done both. I would hope that a discussion of mathematics should be the source of delight rather than derision. Andy Davidson, New York. This is an interesting sentiment and one that I'd like to come back to later. For the record, I had to look up what a Markov chain is. So today's presentation I'm calling Moving from English to Math, or What Was This Guy Thinking? It's really a question of why one would want to make this change as much as whether or not one is able to. Who am I? As Steve told you, I held 2 relatively uninteresting degrees from the University of Virginia. I have a master's in English literature and an education degree in English education. I did write a textbook many years ago called Beyond the Bard, which works with the idea of teaching things other than Shakespeare in an English classroom as a way to engage students. I've been a national board certified teacher now for over 2 decades, and I am a 23-year veteran teacher here at Hoover High School, which either says that I'm very dedicated or I'm very, very lazy and don't want to move. I haven't decided which one of those things is more true. I'm the father of 2 children and master of neither of them, as they tell me all the time. And I thought that the best way to start this program would be to set up an outline, because there's a part of me that's still an English teacher. And if you're going to talk, you should have some clear idea of what you're going to talk about. Yay, English background. And there should be some logic to it, which is that math background kicking in. So I have 3 questions that I really want to answer today. First, why am I now teaching mathematics, and is it legal for me to be doing it? Second, how does teaching math differ from teaching English, if at all? And third, what have I observed or learned from this experience, and why should anyone care? So let's go to the question, why am I teaching mathematics now? And the answer to that question is in several parts. 3 to be specific. First, English burnout. After 21 years of teaching English, I really reached a point, particularly during COVID, when I felt like I could not continue as an English teacher. And to understand this, I still love teaching English. I still love discussing books. I love to work with students on literature and on critical thinking. But the essays that became required in order to teach English effectively simply became overwhelming. And to explain this, I'm a firm believer that if you're going to teach English, you should teach the meaningful part of English. It is of limited use to a high school student to be able to quote large sections of Macbeth or to know what happened in Ivanhoe. These are nice things to know. They make you a more educated person, but they do not necessarily help you in terms of career preparation or future planning. The most essential thing I believe that an English teacher can do is teach critical thinking and writing. And I spoke about this before, so I won't go into detail about it. But my belief was that the only really meaningful assignment that I could give in an English class in order to teach those things was the essay, and specifically the take-home essay. Giving students the opportunity to sit down and prepare, think through an idea, write out their thoughts, support it with evidence, then make an analysis based on that evidence is a skill that's generalizable to virtually any other career field that you can come up with. It's at the core of everything from science and medicine to business to law and so forth. And I think that it's essential for our students today to learn that skill. I don't think that they have it. I think that they're lacking the ability to do critical thinking. And I think that we're seeing a lot of that coming forth in the way that the community as a whole is reacting to politics today. I think that we see the division across political spectrums occurring as a result of either the unwillingness or the inability to critically think about the issues and the material that's being presented to the viewer by news media and by other sources. Pardon me, I'm in my school at the moment, and occasionally we get those bells. Hopefully they won't be too disturbing. So the need to write essays was something that was actually written into our curriculum from being an AP teacher. As an AP instructor, I was expected to give students a take-home essay twice per semester and an in-class essay once every 2 weeks. And grading those was something that I felt was essential to my role as a teacher, not just putting a mark on it or a check or saying, good job, 75 out of 80, but actually commenting in the margin, engaging with the students, trying to talk to them about what they were doing correctly, what they were not thinking about, trying to pose questions for them to engage with. And it turned out that it was taking me on average about 15 minutes to score an essay. That's not so bad, but if you have 120 students, then that becomes approximately 30 hours of outside grading per essay assignment. And when I moved from advanced placement to dual enrollment, which was college credit English, that became 4 essays minimum per semester. So that's about 120 work hours outside of the classroom that I was putting in to score essays. And that ate really badly into my family time. It ate into my personal rest. It became something that was always looming over my head. I felt like one of those people waiting for the tsunami to break, you know, that at any moment this wave of essays would overwhelm me, and that I spent all year long trying desperately to keep up with the current and never succeeding until the very end of the year after all the students were gone. That was the first time I could breathe. And then I would take a 1.5 month break and go back to the same grind. And I just couldn't handle it anymore. I woke up one morning and I said, I cannot look at another essay. I just can't. And so I thought, well, I can either retire from teaching, which I can't do with a full pension yet. And I really need to have that pension to help my kids. And the benefits are pretty good. So I should probably find another approach. And it was about at this time that something very serendipitous happened. I was traveling with the director of our IB program at Hoover High School. to a site visit over in Atlanta. One of the jobs that I have in addition to teaching, or had in addition to teaching English, and now which I have in addition to teaching math, is working with the extended essays that our students write for the International Baccalaureate program. And we were visiting some sites over in Georgia to see how they were managing their extended essay programs and what we could do to improve ours. And while I was there, pardon me again, while I was there in that trip, we were discussing a new program that IB had just created. It was a new mathematics class called Mathematics, Applications, and Interpretation. And our curriculum director had been approaching members of the math department here, asking if they would be interested in teaching this brand new class and whether they would be willing to pick it up. And they weren't getting any takers. And so we were discussing how to recruit a new math teacher to our department and try and find somebody who could teach this class, when the director laughingly, looked at me and said, "Rutsky, you can teach anything, right? Why don't you teach the class?" And I laughed, and everybody else in the car laughed, and we went on our way. But in the back of my head, I thought, that's not the worst idea I've ever heard. When I was in college, I had taken a lot of math classes. I actually was interested in double majoring in math and English. And I did get as far as differential equations, although admittedly, I got a D in that class, and that was probably because of the grace of the professor. But I had a pretty good grasp of math through calculus, and I enjoyed statistics and statistical analysis from time I spent studying psychology. I was a psychology minor. And so I thought, well, I wonder how hard this would be. How difficult would it be to become a math teacher and take this on? And the more I got frustrated with English, the more this became appealing to me. So I started looking into it. And how does one become a math teacher in Alabama public schools? Well, there are two things that you need to, or two ways to do it if you're in the state of Alabama, apparently. You can get either an A certificate or a B certificate. An A certificate is for a teacher who has a master's degree in education in a specific content area, who then passes the Praxis exam for that content area. So when I became an English teacher, I took the Praxis exam for English. I combined that with my master's in English and master's in education, and voila, I was given an Alabama teaching certificate of A certification. However, if you already hold an A certification in the state of Alabama, and you demonstrate qualification in another subject area by passing the Praxis exam for that area, you can obtain what they call a B certification. A B certification has to be renewed on a regular basis, but it's really intended for social studies teachers who need to certify in another elective like psychology or something like that. I hadn't run into anyone who had taken this particular path. There was a teacher at Hoover High School who had moved from teaching French to teaching, or from teaching mathematics to teaching French by way of B certification. And I spoke with her, and she clued me in on the necessary things to do. So I went and I looked at the Praxis exam, and the Praxis math test means that you have to demonstrate the ability to work math from basic algebra onto calculus. And certification at the high school level indicates that you have demonstrated sufficient knowledge of the mathematics to be capable of teaching it. It does not actually help you teach the material, as I have discovered, but and it is not a guarantee that you will be good at teaching the material, as many students in the public school system will tell you. But you do need to know sufficient to pass this test and would become qualified. So this was kind of intimidating. 3 decades since I had done calculus, I was back studying calculus. And it took a year of preparing and reviewing on my own, rereading textbooks, working problems, talking to teachers before I felt ready to take the Praxis exam. But I did, And once I passed, the school applied for my joint certification in mathematics. And now here I am. So if you want to become a math teacher, that's how you do it. You just have to pass this test. So how does being a math teacher change things when you've been an English teacher? Well, these are some really general statements, okay? And any of them could be disputed under certain circumstances, but I'm just going to go ahead and generalize to start a discussion, if you will. English teachers, generally speaking, focus on critical thinking, not just trying to read text, but we're trying to get people to analyze the texts. We want them to think not just about what is being said on the page, but what the author wants us to hear. And that's a very important distinction to be able to hold in your head, to think about both what is said, which is, say, the comment that a politician makes, and what is intended, which is the real purpose of that comment, which may very well be at odds or in a completely different direction from what is being said directly. And understanding that nuance is something that we really need to work on teaching our students. English teachers try very hard to teach students to look at shades of meaning. We present questions that don't have a simple yes or no answer. It's very easy to say, is Macbeth a good play? Yes. This does not lead to any discussion and will not serve any valuable purpose in education. It's a simple answer, but it's not a good answer. And good answers consider the shades of meaning involved. And if I was asked by a student, do I think Macbeth is a good play? I would say, well, what do you mean by a good play, and what purpose am I planning to use it for? Is it entertaining to read? I think so. I think it's a fascinating play. It's filled with interesting things that happen. Is it good for teaching high school students? I think that depends on who's teaching it. If you can do a good job of connecting the idea of what would you do for $1 and say the glut of reality contestant TV shows with Macbeth, I think that you could do a lot to teach Macbeth and make people understand the mindset of a character who is working toward a promised goal and is willing to do whatever it takes to get there. English teachers try to teach writing skills that are necessary for success in the real world. And we generally choose works to teach that help us illustrate ideas or teach a particular type of analysis at any given time. In my opinion, the focus of a good English teacher is essay skills, as I've said. Now, as a math teacher, I've discovered that the mindset is more focused on teaching particular operations and techniques. Instead of thinking about the larger question of why are we doing math, we spend a lot of our time on how do we do math. We may bring in real world examples to try to illustrate the purpose of performing a math process. If I'm asked, well, why are we going to learn about derivatives? Then I might explain that understanding the rate of change of a particular equation can be very important in understanding how to plan. For example, a rate of change problem might help you plan on when to hit the brakes when you're on the road, or whether or not you can actually get your sofa up a flight of stairs, or whether there's enough water in your water tank to water your garden at a certain rate of flow. These are problems that sometimes you need to work. Not always, but sometimes. Statistical analysis in particular, I think, is very, very valuable. Being able to answer the question, hey, is there a connection between the grade level of a student and their performance in math class? That's a legitimate question to ask. An even more, I think, useful example might be the time that I was in a faculty meeting and we were told as a faculty that our ACT average had gone down from 21.7 to 21.5 in the previous year, and that this was an unacceptable drop and that we needed to take action to fix it. And that we were going to rethink our curriculum and how we deliver it to deal with this changing score. And even then, before I was a math teacher, I couldn't help but ask the administrators, do we know what the standard deviation was for this test? Do we know what a significant change is in ACT score for a population our size? How do we know that dropping 2 points wasn't simply a matter of chance or variation from population? If we're going to make a radical change in our curriculum, shouldn't we be doing it based on actual evidence that there's a problem and not just jumping to conclusions? We should approach this from a real, logical, hard science point of view if we're going to make good decisions. And I think that that's a good example of the kind of thinking that we try to inculcate in our students as math teachers. Do I need to do this? And why is it statistically significant that I do it? One really serious difference that I have struggled with as an English teacher, becoming a math teacher, is that the primary method of evaluating math is testing, homework, and practice problems. I have always been opposed to tests as a way of teaching. That's purely out of my English background, because I see tests as being memorization based in many cases in English. And because they're memorization based, they really don't test the things that are important in English, like the ability to rationally consider something or to develop a good argument. And when they do get built in a way to deal with that, they're under these very tight time constraints of 47 minutes to a period, which I think are problematic for many students. A lot of students just don't think that quickly, and they perform far better when they have time to think about and compose an argument. And in most cases, we don't demand people come up with a solution to a massive problem within 47-minute windows. So there's some logic to avoiding that type of testing as a bellwether of whether or not a student is prepared. Math has been a lot harder in that respect. You do have to test. You have to determine whether or not students understand how to perform certain tasks. The real question then becomes, how do you test effectively in mathematics? And what do you do to ensure that you are using a process that actually teaches? What happens after the test when you discover that half of the class do not understand the principle? How do you go back and fix that? And working through that process has been what's taken 2 years for me as a teacher. I'm still working through that process of learning, how do I adapt my goal-driven methods of teaching, which is everybody in the room understands what we are doing and why we are doing it, from an education in English perspective to an education in math perspective. And to me, anything less is unsatisfactory. There should not be anyone in the classroom who does not understand and who is not capable of working the problem. That's a high bar, but one that I insist on. So math teachers, traditionally, we think of math as being a system that's built with right and wrong answers to problems, and it's logic driven, it's based on absolutes. And that's why many people prefer it to English. They see it as being a clear system. If you grade an essay, you can give that essay any grade you want, and you can justify virtually any grade you give an essay in English. There's always a reason why you could give it an A, and there's always a reason why you could give it a D. Math problems are right or wrong. And while you can give partial credit, it's much less flexible than an English situation is. So there tends to be this viewpoint that math is much more rigorous and logical than English. But In point of fact, I think that this is not the case. I think that sometimes we overstate this. Now, you may have seen this problem that popped up on Facebook and was being passed around on social media for months and months, and everybody was arguing about what the actual answer to this equation is. And there are very, very vocal adherents on all sides of this argument. Those of us who were raised on PEMDAS, the parentheses, then exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, order of operations rules, would say, okay, looking at this equation, we need to first deal with the 1 plus 2, which becomes a 3. Then we multiply 3 times 3, and we get a 9 out of that. And then we divide 6 by 9, and we get 2/3. Other people might say, look at this completely differently and come up with a totally different result. They would say, well, in modern math, we consider multiplication and division to be equal in priority. And once we resolve the parentheses, we start from the left of the equation and work our way to the right, performing the functions. And that will yield a different result. If you consider what would happen if you put this into a computer, the computer is going to handle this very differently based on where you place parentheses. And so, again, what seems to be a very rigorous and orderly system does have its limits, and it depends on how we choose to interpret and order the rules. And that is open to argument among mathematicians. Another problem that I like to use to illustrate some of the lack of exactitude in math, at least from a basic level, is the problem that's called the infinity boxes problem. Imagine that you've got 2 boxes sitting in front of you. In one box, you are going to put all of the numbers from 1 to infinity. In the other box, you're going to put all the even numbers from 1 to infinity. Which box has more numbers? Well, from a mathematics point of view, both boxes have the same number of numbers. They're both infinitely full. But from a logical point of view, we also have to recognize that if we're only adding one number every other time to one box, and we're adding a number every time to the other box, then based on our rules of counting, the box that's getting something every time should have more in it. And this paradoxical problem requires that we have to actually develop brand new rules about infinity. Rules that say things like infinities are not all equal. Some infinities are actually bigger than others. You can add infinities, you can multiply infinities. This to me is far beyond where I can think, and is something that is left for far, far smarter people than me. But the notion that you can do this and it makes sense, to me, says that math is not as clear and logical necessarily and without contradiction as sometimes we like to think. So with that in mind, I'd like to make a few observations about English and mathematics and some things that I have come to believe at this point after a couple of years. First, I think it's a terrible mistake to think that English and mathematics are opposite ends of an ability spectrum. I have found that being good at math and being good at English are not mutually exclusive in any way, shape, or form, and that it's more of a question of what you prefer than whether or not you have the capacity. I understand that there have been for a long time arguments about left brain and right brain thinking, but generally speaking, modern psychology has demonstrated that in performing either tasks that involve creativity or tasks that involve mathematical analysis or logic, both sides of the brains are utilized. There is no such thing really as a right-brained or left-brained person. That's more of a convention that we've come up with because we want to reinforce a stereotype that makes us comfortable. We have used these stereotypes of the person who is the sensitive art major and the person who is the cold calculating scientist as tropes in our literature and in our television and movies for a long, long time. But you as members of this group are probably the best examples of how untrue that is. Many of you have backgrounds in hard science. Others have backgrounds as professors of literature or philosophy or fine arts or other areas of the humanities. And yet here you are listening to lectures on interests about mathematics and science and fine art and music and so forth, and capable of understanding what's said in them without difficulty. It's not less accessible to you because you spent your life studying in one area. In fact, in some ways, the biggest obstacle may be that we believe that there's an obstacle, that we have this intrinsic fear of the other discipline. We become comfortable in a particular place, and it's the place that's comfortable for us to work in. And then when we become uncomfortable, we say, well, no, I can't do this, because it's convenient to go back to the safe place. Moving people out of that framework, I think, is essential to being an effective teacher. It's not just about teaching how to be a mathematician or how to solve a problem, but teaching students that math, like English, is simply something that we do. It's a task, it's a function, and functions are functions. It's not inherently more difficult to understand how to construct a sentence than an equation. In fact, I might argue that it's harder to construct a clear sentence in English than it is to put together a math equation. We should be arguing against this frame of thinking. Unfortunately, the way that we've set up school, and I have again talked about this in the past with opportunities I've had with you, is to divide up the day into these discrete 47-minute periods, one of which is labeled English and another is labeled math, and another is labeled science, and another is labeled fine arts, and so on, as if we can turn off the part of our brain that deals with math during the English period and vice versa. And when we do that, I think that we miss one of the most important things out there, which is the place that they blend. I'm sure that you've all heard people say there's nothing new under the sun, especially when it comes to, say, writing. Every plot has been used. All the ideas are being recycled. We're just doing variations of them at this point. The whole postmodern movement in art and literature was based on the idea that there is nothing new. And so what do? We take old things and we juxtapose them in complicated and jarring manner in order to produce new thinking, to break us loose from our straitjacket of beliefs or values. And I think that there's definitely new things under the sun, but to find them, we are going to have to stop thinking about looking in a single field. I think that the person who thinks about literature and literature on its own and never considers how literature interacts with the rest of the world is doomed to repeat everything that's been repeated in literature again, because there is no blending with the rest of the world. You have isolated yourself from all the new ideas. It's when somebody is working in literature and says, I wonder what would happen if I applied chaos theory to a novel. I wonder what would happen if I decide to create the first hypertext. Julio Cortázar, in his book Hopscotch, wrote a book that is completely nonlinear and is tremendously confusing. But it is a novel exercise that promotes all sorts of new ways of thinking. Italo Calvino's novel, If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, is one of my favorite novels because it refuses to bend to a single narrative and in fact plays with the idea of the reader, the narrator, and the characters, forcing all of them to assume all three roles over the course of the story, and doing so in a marvelously ingenious way. So I believe that what we need to do more is integrate English and mathematics. We need to be thinking about how do we bring these two things together? How do we ask math students to bring English thinking to a math problem? How do we rephrase this math problem in word problem form? I mean, if we think about it, word problems are really one of the most challenging things for students to deal with. And I think it's because they think that there's something other than math problems, and they see English and math in the same place, and it fries the brain. It's something that they can't quite figure out how to process yet. And it takes time. To me, English and mathematics are best thought of as languages. They're both their own language. They both have grammatical rules. We talked about PEMDAS and other such things. They have their own vocabularies. They have their own irregularities. You aren't allowed to take the square root of a negative number unless you want to start playing around with imaginary numbers. Those things make learning that language challenging and frustrating. If you try to explain to somebody what a square root is, and you explain to them that when you square a square root, you get the original number, then the question of why you can't do that with a negative number becomes very confusing. Why is it that doesn't work properly? Why is it that you can't have a negative under the radical? What goes wrong and why does it go wrong? These are challenging questions to explain. And I think that we have to use our skills, not as math teachers necessarily, but also as English teachers, to develop the right metaphor, the right language to help every student understand what is being said. Let me give you an example. The way that we think in our heads when we understand mathematics can be very different from the way that a student thinks. When I am working a problem on the board, I might write out this very simple algebraic expression, and my steps would be very straightforward. X plus 3 is equal to 4 times the quantity x minus 2. Therefore, x plus 3 is equal to, distributing the 4, 4x minus 8. So x is 11/3. This step to this step loses my students every single time. They do not see that I have moved this 3 and this 8 to one side and moved the 4x and the x to another side and then divided. I see that instinctively, that what I've done is isolate x. That's the way I see it. I need to find x, so I'm going to isolate x on one side of the equation. They look at the steps and they do not see how I went from here to here. This, which is instinctive to me, is not instinctive to them. If I reorder a problem midway through, I lose my students. X plus 3 is 4 times the quantity x minus 2. X plus 3 is 4x minus 8. 3 plus 8 plus x equals 4x. Right now, I'm going to have 6 hands go up. What just happened, Mr. Rutsky? How did we go from x plus 3 to 3 plus 8 plus x? Never mind that x plus 3 and 3 plus x are the exact same thing. And we know that. But they see that and they don't understand. How did we do this? They do not understand that that grammar is interchangeable in math. We wouldn't take a sentence and say, I played with the dog, and then the next time say, the dog played with me, and say they were the same thing. But we can do that because of the properties of mathematics and addition. So when I move down, you know, they don't understand how we went through this particular stage. This is the way that my students work this math problem. X plus 3 is the quantity is equal to the quantity 4 times x minus 2. X plus 3 is 4x minus 8. X plus 3 minus 3 is equal to 4x minus 8 minus 3. Therefore, x is equal to 4x minus 11. X minus x is equal to 4x minus 11 minus x. 0 is therefore equal to 3x minus 11. 0 plus 11 is 3x minus 11 plus 11. So 11 is 3x. 11 thirds is 3x divided by 3. And so x is equal to 11 thirds. That's 10 steps to do something that I did in 2. This is why we have trouble teaching math, because we forget that for them, this is the learning process of the grammar. They have to learn to shortcut this. We instinctively take the word is not and convert it to isn't as we talk. They do not do that yet with math. That's the equivalent of what I did here, of abbreviating. And until they learn what it means to say it in is not form, they cannot abbreviate it. So we have to be very, very patient walking through the steps until they feel comfortable abbreviating and understand that this is the same thing as someone who is learning a new language for the first time. Word problems, I think, are the nexus of English and math, and they're prone to causing problems in both worlds. This is an example of a word problem that I gave earlier this year for a problem with series analysis. On the first day of her new workout program, Anna can lift 15 pounds. On each day following, the amount of weight Anna can lift increases by 2 pounds. Meanwhile, John is following his own workout program. On the first day, he can lift 10 pounds, but each day thereafter, he can lift 10% more weight than the previous day. How many days will it be before John lifts more than Anna? Now think about that question for a moment. And what I would ask my students is, what am I asking for? What do I want to know? And how do I find that? The problem says, how many days will it be before John lifts more than Anna? But that really isn't the math question that we're asking. What we're really asking is for them to set up a pair of equations and compare them to see when the two are equal. And there is nothing in this math problem that says to them, set up an equation for how much Anna lifts every day. Set up an equation for how much John lifts every day. Set the two equal to each other, and then determine at what point those two values are equal, because on the next day, John will be lifting more than Anna. That is what they have to see in order to do this problem correctly, but that is nowhere in this math problem. And I think that this goes back to that wonderful letter that Steve gave us at the beginning of the lecture, where the author said the superfluous language, the superfluous vocabulary is a matter of perspective. Is there something innately more accessible about Markov chains than Tristan or Isolde? No. I think that both are equally obscure. And what we have to do is stop thinking about individual disciplines as being clear or not clear, and think more about, are we using language that is accessible to a new learner to convey what the real question is? This is a question wrapped in a question. And until you unwrap it and you know exactly what you're looking for, your introductory level students are not going to see the problem. They are not going to be able to solve this. 1 out of my 14 students this year was able to look at this problem and properly set it up the first time they saw it. That is a very, very poor rate. And we're talking about IB students. We're talking about students who are above average in their work ethic. Now, they're not necessarily above average in their math ability. I've learned that very clearly. Some of them are very, very poor math students, but they're poor math students because they have not learned to translate this sort of language into the language that they're familiar with yet. And until we see that linguistic issue, I don't think that we're going to be any better at teaching mathematics. I think that we need to spend more time as English educators in training math teachers to speak like English teachers, to use restatement, to use metaphors, to use clarifying language, and to build on those principles to keep telling a student, this is how the problem works until we find the language the student speaks. Anything less, we're asking the student to come to us both as math students and as language students. And that's a lot to ask. I think that math also induces panic in ways that English doesn't. And that's simply because of the way that math is tested. Math is tested with time limits. Very rare that you give students take-home tests in math. And even if you do, you set a time limit. And students tend to blank under pressure, especially students who already feel anxious about the tests. So because of the way math is designed and because of the nature of the way that we evaluate it, I think that people see math as panic inducing. Very rarely do you see people panic about writing an English paper. And they may not like doing it, but they don't work themselves up into a literal panic attack in your classroom. This year, I have 2 students who have experienced panic attacks during math tests. I can't relate to that. I do not understand the idea of a test being intimidating. I have always felt that tests were challenges, and challenges are fun, but some people don't see challenges as fun. So a great deal of time in my class is spent trying to make students understand that a test is not a test. It is an opportunity to show that you understand how to work a problem. And not a pressure situation, but a repetition situation. It's nothing different than what we did in class. The only difference is how we're counting it. And once we get to the point where students feel more comfortable that they're not being judged solely on the test, and that they don't have to somehow come up with something that is going to be hidden from them, then they start to perform without the anxiety. Of course, that does require that you come to an understanding with the students about what is going on in your classroom, and that you help them to understand that there are no surprises or tricks, that you really are there to work with them. Students who think that they can't do math, they just haven't had the right teacher or the right approach yet. I really don't believe that there's any student who can't do math. I have worked with students who are not terribly good at it, but even students who are not terribly good at it learn it if you are patient enough to spend the time with them finding the language that they speak. Eventually, you can break through and you can get them to understand how to work a problem. It may take 6, 7, 8 repetitions. And we don't necessarily have the time for that on a regular basis. Excuse me. But we have to make time if we want that student to come along with us. We have to find ways to do that. And again, that's going to go back to the need in America to have smaller classes and more time. And if we want to improve our status as math students across the world, comparatively speaking, we're going to need more time and more space in our classes so that we can deal with this. This has also been a really horrifying realization for me as a math teacher, because so many students in my class look at me after the first couple of days in a unit and they say, was it really this simple? I say, well, of course it was. I mean, this is all there was to it. And they start telling me this horror story about their 7th grade math teacher who made this absolutely impossible to understand and who they were frightened to death of. And I'm thinking, how did this happen? I mean, this concept is not very hard. How is it that it became so scary? And why are so many people scared of a teacher? If you have students who are scared of you, you're doing something wrong. And that's not your role. Your role is not to be scary and intimidating. Your role is to be the student's help. And I don't really understand the scare and intimidate mindset. One thing that we do notice is that students second guess themselves in math in ways that they rarely do when they are writing. Although to some extent we do that when we write, because we sit there and we stare at that sentence on our computer screen, then we delete it and we rewrite the sentence. And sometimes we'll stare at that blinking cursor for a few minutes trying to figure out how we want to say something. But math students will work a math problem on a test, and then they will decide that that was way too easy and they must have done something wrong. I have to talk them down from that idea that there's a trap hidden behind every question and that they are somehow missing the answer. The intent of a test is not to hide pitfalls. This shouldn't be a run through Indiana Jones's Temple of Doom. It should be a simple question of, do you understand? And when they see it as a trap or a battle or a fight or something like that, then again, you are approaching teaching the wrong way and you need to change. To be successful, I guess I would underline this: students and teachers need to have the same goal, and that goal should not be good grades. If the number one thing your students are concerned about is whether or not they have a good grade in your class, you are doing it wrong. If the number one thing you are concerned about is whether your students are getting good grades on tests, you are doing it wrong. What you are there to do is to help students to understand how to work certain problems or how to learn certain concepts. The grades are only there as markers along the way. They're like mile markers on the road. The road is what matters, not the mile marker. The mile marker just tells you how far you've come down the road. If you lose sight of the fact that you're on a road, then the mile markers become meaningless. And the same thing is true with teaching. If you get all hung up on whether or not your class is getting A's, then you will begin teaching in a way to create A's. And that will lead you down a bad path. What you need to do is be thinking, is my class understanding what I'm saying and able to replicate it? And what do I need to do to help them get to that point? Everything else will follow from that. One of the greatest things that I've learned in making this transition, and I appreciate your patience with this presentation, I'm almost done here. I'm a much better teacher when I'm uncomfortable. And I think that that is a truth that every teacher should embrace. When I was an English teacher, it was a breeze to be an English teacher. I never had to think about what I was doing. I always had the answers. I always knew how to write something, to phrase something, what was being said, or at least some idea of how to guide a student through what was being said in a passage, how to promote a discussion, how to think about something. I always understood that. And I have gained that ability from being an avid reader. I know what a good sentence sounds like, and I can make good sentences because I know what they sound like. If it becomes easy, then we don't have to think about how we teach it. We just expect that everyone is going to get it as easily as we do. And when we start having that expectation, it makes us worse teachers. I've found that since I started teaching math, I spend far more time preparing for class. I spend far more time thinking about what I'm going to teach and how I'm going to say it. And I do a much better job of meeting my students on their ground instead of my own. And that's because I am absolutely petrified every day that I am going to say something absolutely ridiculously stupid in class, that I'm going to make a completely nonsensical mistake, and that I'm going to get called on it, and I'm going to look bad. And that is a very strong motivator for me to really think through what I'm doing. And it's a motivator that I haven't had in 20 plus years. And I think that that is wonderful. That is making me a much, much better teacher. It is taking me out of my comfort zone, and it is keeping me thinking, which is really important as well. I was bored, I was tired, and now I am much less bored and tired. I also have to understand and accept the idea that my mistakes and weaknesses are really the source of my credibility as a teacher. When I acknowledge, as I'm working a problem on the board, that I did something wrong, it is showing my students it is perfectly normal to make a mistake working a problem. When you recognize it, you go back and you fix it. If even the teacher makes mistakes, then why is there a fear of making mistakes? We have to own the fact that we are fallible and that we do make mistakes. Sure, we want to get it right when it matters. That's why we learn to double check things. That's why we work the problems on the board and we double check them. And if I make a mistake, I am very quick to say now, yep, that was my mistake. I'll know better next time. But it's an easy mistake to make, and here's why. And I think, again, that does a lot to reassure students that they are not out of their depth, because then they understand mistakes are fine. And they really don't understand that. Teaching is an endless process of reinvention, and we must understand that if one method of teaching something doesn't work, we need to find another. Every single time I teach something, I need to think about how I would do it differently for a different student. If I'm teaching the same thing from the same notes every year, again, I am doing something wrong. They may be brilliant notes. I may be a brilliant lecturer, but I am only going to reach a fraction of the people I would reach if I would stop locking myself into one way of thinking and one way of presenting. And I need to be able to understand what my goal is. My goal is not to demonstrate my brilliance. I am arrogant enough. I do not need to demonstrate my arrogance. What I need to do is I need to teach children. And that isn't about me being smart. That's about me making them more aware of the content. And then finally, I'll just close with this. My decision to change from English to math was not just about workload. It was also about proving something to myself. I have struggled, like many people do, with the whole idea of a midlife crisis and whether what I am doing is what I really want to be doing. But I've also struggled with the idea that all I can do is be an English teacher. I've never liked that box. And I've always struggled to be able to know a little bit about a lot of things, to be conversant in all areas, to be able to hold my own in most topic areas of discussion, and to feel like I am a capable and intelligent person. I do not believe that human beings are meant to be single-minded. I think that we are adaptive, we are capable, we have multiple frames of reference and the ability to hold multiple ideas. And to choose one idea or one way to live our life is to eat the same meal every day. It may be nutritious, it may be filling, but it is not satisfying in the long run. To learn is to live. And I think that's something that all of you here in this program demonstrate. It is how we do things. I said earlier in the program that it was harder now to answer the question when people ask me, what is it that you teach? Well, now when I get that question, I remember that I don't teach a subject, I teach thinking. And teaching thinking is something that I do in 2 different languages. And it's something that I have to get better at every day. Thank you very much. And I would be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. Steve, I think you're muted at the moment.
I would suggest, rather than entering things.
You're muted,
Steve.
So you can hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Well, instead of using the chat to ask questions, speak up and identify yourself and ask your question. I think that would work best. No reason.
Joshua, you probably need to stop screen sharing to
Excuse
see
me?
everybody.
Okay, good.
Josh, I have a question for you regarding your word problem. No, your equations, what you worked for us. Would it not be fairly reasonable to get the students to understand the concept of the equation, the equality? That, you know, matter can't be created or destroyed. So you have to do one side of the equation has to equal the other side of the equal sign. And so what you do on one side, you have to do to the other side. And if they understand that principle, they should be able to solve just about any math question. You're muted. You're muted.
You are absolutely right, Steve. Once they understand that principle, then yes, they can work toward it. I think that what the problem I showed demonstrates is that the students have not yet learned the abbreviations or shortcuts that we use. See, 47 minutes, I have to leave now and think about English. The things that we use in math, they don't do that in their head the way that we do.
Fair enough.
Mary has a question.
Yeah, Josh, my name is Mary Verley, and I, like you, I was a double major in English and mathematics in college.
Good for you.
And I taught mathematics at the high school level for many years. I can't believe it's been 12 years since retirement. And that included AP statistics and AP calculus. And at one point, I thought I wanted to go and teach English. I had an opportunity, and my experience may be limited, but my experience was the students would certainly do the mathematics homework and keep up because it was something written. And I had a devil of a time sometime to getting them to actually do the reading assignments. But I just have 2 points I wanted to mention. I think what's happened in mathematics education over the years, for many, many years, the mathematics curriculum basically prepared everyone to be physics majors, engineers, people who studied in the physical sciences. But the vast majority of students do not enter those fields. And those of us many of us have adult children with very good jobs, and most of them, I think, or at least a good majority of them, are using probability and statistical techniques in their work. We have a son that works in a corporation in compliance and works with databases, but almost everything he does involves some kind of analysis. And our daughter's a business consultant, same thing. It's all statistical analysis. And as you probably know, the curriculum has come around to that. The National Math Standards came out in 1989. They were the first standards. And the interesting thing about those standards, I think, when they first came out, they were descriptive, not prescriptive. But over time, as different local and state school administrators got a hold of these standards, they became much more prescriptive. And what has happened is, my feeling is that they have, in many cases, assumed, I think the early people who wrote the standards made the naive assumption that all teachers were good teachers. And they would figure out how to teach these concepts if they were just told what the expectations were for students. Over time, they become much more step-by-step prescriptions and, I don't know, commands and structures for teachers. And I just want to mention one thing. When I started teaching mathematics, the first day of school, we received a mathematics textbook and an answer key. We created all our own instruments, all our own lesson plans, and that was a great learning experience. If you know anything about teaching today, when teachers get a textbook, they get a very, well, now it's probably all online, but they get incredible resources. Every lesson plan is written, every test is written. Anyway, there's not much room for creativity. The other thing I wanted to mention along the lines of how probability and statistics have become much more important in kids' preparation. That word problem that you gave us, the Anna starts lifting 15 pounds and then she lifts 2 more pounds each day. And then John starts with 10 pounds and increases by 10%. My initial thought, and I was thinking back to what my students would have done, they would have grabbed their graphing calculators, put that information into a list, in an array, and they would just have the calculator figure out, okay, what's going to happen? It's going to be 15, 17, 19, 21, and then look at the other list, noticing that they're multiplying by 1.1 each time. So I think what's happened in teaching, I think it's more difficult because there are many, and I think kids are being taught, there are many, many ways to solve a problem. So with the introduction of technology, I think kids are beginning to realize you don't necessarily need a formula or an algorithm. If you can tell the computer, do this 10,000, do this iteration 10,000 times and see when it works. So I don't know how much technology you're using. I know you have to use it in AP Calculus for sure. And one last thing, I think what's going to happen now, I don't know if anyone else has talked to their grandchildren about the way they're learning mathematics, but we have 3 grandchildren in Providence and they're using a program called Eureka Math, which came out of New York. And I am amazed what they can do in 2nd grade because they learn how to take numbers apart and put them together all mentally. I mean, they can do multiplication by in their head. Okay, if I want to multiply by 4, I've got 4 of those, and they deconstruct numbers. So I think that's encouraging, the way kids should be learning mathematics now. Sorry, I went on.
No, not at all. And I agree with virtually everything you said. The class that I teach actually was developed by IB as a class to complement the more advanced mathematical class that is part of the standard IB program. It is intended as almost a math for future humanities people, or a math for social science course as an alternative to students who are going to take analytical calculus. And so this tracking that we kind of moved away from is coming back in a different sort of way, but with a better plan behind it. The idea that not everybody needs to understand how to do multivariate calculus in order to work in their desired field, but everybody can benefit from certain skills that should be centered. We do use technology quite frequently. In fact, graphing calculators that perform ANOVAs, mind-blowing to me when I had to do it on a mainframe when I was in college, and now they can do it with 3 key presses on a little tiny calculator. And that graph equations and things like that, they do change the game. But what I notice is that when my students try to set up that problem, if they get to the point where they're setting up the problem, that they look at that 10% and they use 0.10 as their multiplier instead of 1.1. They don't understand additive being 1.1. They don't, or they'll misinterpret having the 2 equations and setting them equal, and they'll give me the result when they're equal, rather than thinking, well, what do we want? We want what comes next, and so forth. So there is a lot of room still to teach that material. You're totally right, though, about the way that math is changing. I'm seeing it with my own kids, and I think that that's a positive change.
Okay,
This is Jerry Brown. Your talk today was excellent. and you must be a fabulous teacher.
Well, I'd like to hope that my students don't hate the time they spend there. One of the basic principles that I operate under is that if you respect students, you don't waste their time. You don't want them to waste yours. And so I try to make that basic ground rule clear from the very beginning. We don't do homework that is unnecessary. We don't do grind work that is unnecessary. The time that we spend is time that they are giving me to help them be better students. And so I value that time very highly. And I try to make it clear to them that my goal in that time is to make them better students. And that does not in any way connect to me earning a boat for every student that I fail. You know, most students have this idea in their head that teachers are looking to fail them, and they do not understand that the paperwork involved with failing a student is so overwhelmingly frustrating that we would do almost anything to keep a student from failing a class at this point, let alone the threats of litigation, the parent calls, and the problems with administrative members who want to know why we didn't drag that student kicking and screaming to success. So,
I think James Lowry has his hand up.
Yeah.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to make a quick point. I loved your talking at the beginning about English and critical thinking. I would also talk in terms of logical and structured, and mathematics also is logical and structured. And so one of my examples is from the 1970s and 1980s, back in the mainframe days. The best, and I have articles about this, the best computer programmers were female English majors. And there were two people here in Birmingham. When I'm worked in IT at Sonat, and another one at one of the major banks. And they would go to UAB specifically and recruit and hire female English majors to do computer programming in their companies. And so the reasoning is that females generally work through a problem from the beginning to the end, taking each step and not trying to jump ahead to the conclusion. Males in general will try to jump too quickly to the conclusion. And so English, being a very logical and structured language kind of thing, not only is essays and novels very structured, but also English grammar is very structured and logical. So the other part of it is that one of the things that they were acquiring was that logical thinking and that structured thinking. And they both said that they could teach what the person needed. They could teach enough COBOL for the person to function really well in 6 weeks, but they could not teach the person their structured thinking and their logical thinking and their critical thinking in that sense in that amount of time. So they would go and actually recruit female English majors to be their computer programmers.
excellent point, and 100% correct. If you look at a paragraph is a formula. It is, the formula is thesis statement plus evidence points equals conclusion. And when you understand that there is a mathematical rigor to a good essay, then you become a much better essay writer. The rest is ornamentation. I mean, I did get a lot of feedback when I was writing as a college major that my writing was dry and boring. And that was true because it was very linear and logical. And that was what I was trying to achieve. It wasn't always popular, but it makes the point. And I think that what you say about the construction of computer programming being, remember that this must be in place in order for this expression to be run correctly by the computer, and it must follow this sequence, and it must close with this bracket, and so on, very much like writing a good essay.
I may be the last person in the world who loves diagramming sentences.
Yes, you are.
Yes, probably so.
Very, very logical.
I think we're well over time, and it may be time to stop the questions here. And Josh, I think you gave us an excellent talk on the subject.
Thank
Food
you,
food for
Josh.
thought.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me back to speak to you. You guys are wonderful, and please keep inspiring your grandchildren and your children to develop more and more interesting ideas. When they bring them to school, it makes life a lot better.
Very good, very good. Good
Thanks.
talk, and thank
Thank
you all
you.
for joining us.
Great talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.
And unless there's something else, we're going to end it here. Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, Josh.
I have one question.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Joel Fillhours. I would like to correspond with Josh. He has gotten my interest, and if he would share an email, I would like to just have some interaction with him.
Absolutely. It would be my pleasure. I am going to put that in the chat. If you can open that, you'll see there's my email. And I would be happy to speak with you or share any information that I have that might be of interest to you, sir.
Yes, thank you. I have it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Ellen, we covered a few things before you got on earlier about needing speakers for the spring. Is there anything else you want to add? And by the way, you're muted still. But.
How about that?
That's good.
Okay. Yes, speakers for the spring semester. And we will keep an eye on the COVID situation. I'm hoping that we can meet in person starting March 16th.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you. And we'll see you all tomorrow morning at 9:30. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.